So, I think I messed up on the last upload. I think that emotion that I was talking about, the emotion that you feel about existence itself, I don't think that's endemic to us, because if you think about it, then we would be stuck in that and it would never change. But then I was talking about changing it. So if that's possible to change that, then that's not really endemically me. So then what is endemically me? Well, what I think it is it's a hollow space. It's the capacity to feel. So my ultimate center is then hollow, and then I can choose to fill that with whatever I want or not. And that's what gives me the ability to change. If it were static, if it were kept always the same, then everything would end up being deterministic. So obviously things can't be ultimately deterministic, because then that would make all freedom of choice an illusion, and everything would eventually just collapse into just a static object, which it clearly isn't, because I'm moving in it. So if I'm moving in it, then it can't be static. Ultimately then, who I am, and I've often wondered this, is, at least it seems to be, nothing. So like I had said, capacity for emotion. Not emotion itself, but the capacity to feel an emotion. So it's sort of like a cup. Roger used to put it to me this way. He'd say, the value of the cup is in its emptiness. So it's, able to be filled, so that way you can drink out of it. And I think ultimately that is, the best analogy that I've come across so far with describing who I am ultimately is, I am nothing. I am a part of nothing. I have nothing at my ultimate center. And I really love that, because I get this strong sense that anybody that would listen to that would have absolutely no idea what I'm talking about, and be absolutely certain that they did, and get it so ass-backwardsly wrong that they would never be able to figure out what I'm actually getting at. What I'm actually getting at is the exact opposite of the way that it looks, which is pretty much par for the course, at least for me anyway, is if it presents itself in a certain way, that's the one thing that it can't be. It must be something else. So if I say that I have nothing at my center, you hear, oh, well, that just means that he feels depressed. No, that's not at all what I'm saying. What I'm saying is I have the capacity to feel however I want, and to fill that hollowness or emptiness, or what is the word that I'm looking for? The open hands can be filled with whatever. It's not a closed fist, it's an open hand. That's what I'm getting at. Not depression, not, well, I feel bad. It's an open hand, and so I can put anything in there. It doesn't necessarily have to be solid, although I do like that, but it isn't stuck like that. So then, why is it that I'm me, but I'm not somebody else? Like, why am I not those people that just passed me? What is the ultimate difference between me and those people? Well, again, if we're talking about a point of nothing, or nothingness, what seems to be different is the location of that, and the size of it, the relative size, the relative location, the relative depth, the relative color or spin of it, or however you want to put it. Those things would all be different. But the ultimate essence of who I am as a person, it gets lost in the nothingness. It gets lost in the shadows and the dark. It becomes so subtle that I can't discern it anymore. And this is what I had felt and what I had found very early on in my studies and my research about this ontological topic about who am I and where did I come from and how did existence begin and what is reality ultimately. All these ontological questions, when I first started to research them, it became apparent to me that I don't have a self, that there is no such thing as me. And I'm reminded of that again, that it is just a pocket that can be filled with whatever It doesn't. Hey, how's it going? It doesn't have a static attribute. It doesn't have a static position. So even though it doesn't have a static position, the way that it gets defined is external to itself, not internal. So that's the key, is I don't have anything endemically unique to myself, except that I'm not everyone else. And that's what makes me me, is that I'm not you, and I'm not this, and I'm not that, and I'm not anyone else. And if you add up all those knots, then you end up with this, what I call the silhouette effect, is the last thing remaining is me. But you would have to systematically eliminate everything else in existence in order to find out what that actually is, which is exactly what we mean when we say in and of itself. We mean to remove it from everything in existence so that it remains isolated. But again, ironically, and quite to the point, if I were to pick anything in existence and pluck it out of existence, then I would not exist, or I would not exist with that thing in order to observe it. So let's say this phone, right? I could take this phone and chuck it into space, and then it would be in and of itself, but then it's so far away from me that I can't see it. I could put it in the middle of a black hole, but then I'd never be able to see it. I'd never be able to get any information about it. It would be there, it would be in and of itself, it would be causally isolated from everything in existence, but because of its causal isolation, I would not be able to observe it, and then I wouldn't know what it is. And that's exactly what I keep finding over and over and over. Every time I look, that's what I find, is if you ask that question and you follow it long enough, you end up at a true dead end. Not a dead end because you ran out of steam or you gave up, or you found some video game that was distracting you and you just ended up playing that all day long and forgot about it. It's a dead end in the truest sense. It does not go any further. There isn't anything there at the end of the destination. What you find is that there never was a destination. The quintessential endemic essence of myself does not exist. All that makes me separated from whatever else exists is simply that I am not any of those other things. And I think that this is the truest way in which I am an image of God, because like God, I cannot be isolated, and I cannot be described, and I cannot be observed directly. And the only thing that I can know about myself, the only things I can learn, are things that are due to relations that exist between myself and everything else. And exactly the same thing is true of God. I don't learn anything about God directly because there's no way to directly interact with God, because God is God. God is infinite. We are finite, so we can't, by definition, approach God, because the finite can never become infinite. They're two completely different things. It's like oil becoming water. It just doesn't happen. So, in the same sense that God is ineffable, I am ineffable. In the same sense that God is infinite, I am infinite. In the same sense that God cannot be related directly to being analogous to or metaphorical with anything else in existence. We can't liken God to the sun. We can't liken God to the moon or anything else. Like it says in the Bible, you can't make any graven images. It's like that. There isn't any image, there isn't anything that I could show you or any concept that I could give you that would be interchangeable with God. And likewise, there's nothing that I can find that would be interchangeable with myself. The difference being is that I'm not absolutely ineffable. I'm relativistically ineffable. That means that you could systematically eliminate everything that you know of in existence one by one, and the more that you do that, the clearer the resolution is of what I am is. And ultimately what I find when I do that is a location. I find a particular location because that's the one thing about me that never changes. And it's the only thing about me that no one else has, is my location. So it's the same thing as asking, where did I come from? It's kind of a weird question to ask because if all I am is where I am, and then I ask where did I come from, then I'm asking how did I arrive at the present moment? And then if I follow that present moment all the way back to the origin, then I run out of past moments to go back to. So why am I at this present moment? Because of where I was at 5 minutes ago. And why was I there 5 minutes ago? Because of where I was at 10 minutes ago. And why was I at that place 10 minutes ago? Because of where I was an hour ago and 10 years ago. And at the birth of myself, there's no more years to go backwards in time. So I run out of anything to say. And it's kind of like that. It just, you end up with, the only thing that remains is this location. And what is it a location of? Well, it's a subjective location. So we know that. And it seems to be a subjective location that then relates to everything else in existence. And so that seems to be our emotion about existence. But that emotion can change. So it isn't the emotion itself, it's the capacity to feel that emotion. So then what is that capacity? Is, I suppose, depth. And what is that depth? Is, I guess, what you can't live without, maybe. It's what everything else is not. But it doesn't seem to have a substance. It seems to be a bit of nothing. But I suppose that that's the case because I'm asking a relativistic question about a subjective totality. So that's why it doesn't really have an answer that's satisfactory. But if I were to attempt to have a satisfactory answer, this capacity to feel, or this depth, doesn't seem to make much sense. I'm going to have to think about that for a while. So, why am I me? If what I am is ultimately a center point, which is a bit of nothing, and that is at the center of my being and at the center of every being, and those are all in the state of subjectivity, and we've already discussed intent and emotion, then it can't be any of those things. But it has to be subjective. It has something to deal with subjectivity, but it also has something to deal with nothing. So I guess it would be what nothing else has in common. What is unique to me that there is not anything else that shares that, whatever that is. But is that and is, or is it not? And I would say it's not, because the moment that I attribute something to that, if I call it an emotion, it dissolves, as we've already seen. If I call it a relation, it dissolves because it can't fit within subjectivity if it's a relation. So it has to be purely subjective, but yet it has to be something that isn't like anything else that's subjective, which means it's like a paradox. It is subjective, but it's not subjective. It's in the field of subjectivity, but it itself is not a subject. So then what is that? It's a whole in existence, or at least it's a whole in being, or it's a whole in myself, but it's a whole nonetheless. And that whole, again, you have to ask, is that a real whole, or is that just a hole in my information? Is it a blind spot, or is there really not anything there at all? And like I say, of course, everybody is going to say Oh, well, yeah, of course there's something there, because if it was nothing, then you wouldn't exist, or you wouldn't feel, or you wouldn't do whatever. But again, that's stupid, because it's disregarding the actual point being that it's like a cup or a hole. It is something that can be filled, because it is not filled. A cup wouldn't work if it were solid. A hole can't be filled if it's already full. There has to be this emptiness so that it can be filled. It doesn't mean that I feel empty. It means there is emptiness to give me the ability to even have any feeling about anything. The same way that the mind has to be, what is the word? I guess open. Maybe not empty, open, in order for it to work. I think that's the better word for it, is open. So that hole, I guess, then would be an openness. And if my theory is right, where everything is bleeding into everything else just beyond itself, then maybe what that is it's God bleeding into me. And so I have no information about that, because all I know is we're talking about God, and then we go from God to me, and I'm smaller than God. And so it seems like it's like a skylight. It's open and translucent enough to let God's light shine through it without obstructing it, the way that a static object would, the way a wall or a ceiling or some object would obstruct that. This is open enough to allow it to go through. So maybe that's the best word for it, is it's a hole on the other side of which is God. And so you've got God, this hole, and then me. Or God, this hole, and then everything else in existence. And so all of that seems to suggest to me that ultimately what I am is an image of God, and God is ineffable. So I guess what that means is that if I'm going to be who I am, then I'm going to have to be open. If I close myself off from God, I can't sustain my own being. At that point, if I were closed and let's say it was nothing, then all that depressive stuff that everybody heard that I never said would then become real, would then actually manifest as the actual truth at that point. So as long as I maintain a faith in God, then I am open, kind of like the eye dilating. It opens and then I can see and more light comes in and then I become more real. And if I close that off, then I end up being more like nothing. So I can choose in between being ineffable like God, or I can choose to be ineffable like nothing. And so that's what I was getting at as far as there being ultimately just two basic types of emotions, is open and closed, or most people call it love and hate, but that's really technically it's openness and closedness. If I close myself off, then I become like nothing because of that hole, because I don't have anything sustaining my own being. I'm borrowing it from something that's outside of myself, because I can't create myself, so I can't sustain myself in absolution against everything else in existence. So then if I close myself off, then I cease to be. And I'm basically writing my own death sentence if I do that. If I say that all I am is nothing, then I've closed myself off from God's light, and I've attempted to explain everything away. And at that point, it just becomes some dead object to me, and it has like no value. This is the limit of nihilism, where if you can punch through that, you can find what I call anti-nihilism, which is this openness. And then you can find God and you can feel that effulgent joy. But if you close yourself off to that, then you fall all the way back in to yourself. You withdraw completely and you become as nothing.
And those are the types of states that people get into when they go on a mass shooting rampage, or they kill their dog, or they step on their baby's head, or they or they rape some little girl in the park. The reason that people do that is because they have closed themselves off. They say that all there is whatever. The reality is exactly just this way, and that's it. And they close it, and they say, and that's it. And it cannot be anything else, and it cannot go any further, and there cannot be any questioning, and there cannot be any way that it could be wrong. And they close themselves off, and they make everything into this machine, this dead, soulless machine. And then, of course, that machine doesn't have any fucking point, because you can't even describe how it got built, let alone who built it or why. And so then you say, well, it's all pointless. It's just this crazy, crazy machine, this cold, crazy machine that doesn't make any damn sense, goes nowhere, means nothing, and eventually collapses into nothing. And that's the state that those people get into. And that's the state that I used to be in, when I used to think that there was such a thing as the answer. If you believe in something like that, where there's just one truth that explains literally everything, that's closed. That's a closed system. As soon as you say, and that's it, and you close yourself off to any further questioning, no further investigation, no mystery, no wonder, no curiosity, no doubt, just this machine, just this cold, calculated certainty, that's when you run into these problems. That's when you start to become totally dysfunctional. And it's one of the reasons that I believe in God, is because you take that away and you've got everything that makes life worth having, that makes life meaningful. But you add that in, and then you start to see why people go out and commit mass shootings. And it is no longer the case that you sit there and say, well, this person's just a disease. This person's just a walking nightmare, and they're just crazy, and that's it. Because that's the same thing that they did in order to go on the rampage. That's what scares people, is subconsciously they find an affinity with this person that they say that they hate so deeply that they can't even begin to understand. The reason that they say that is because they're feeling a sense of fear that they are, in fact, that person somewhere deep down in their soul. And that's why they say, no, I'm not like that. And they'll say it adamantly and emotionally and desperately, hope to God that they can somehow convince you with enough extravagant, denial that somehow that will make it so that they aren't that person. And they'll, nervously chuckle about it, or they'll say, oh, it's all just satire. They'll desperately try to get out of that situation so they don't have to recognize and encounter the similarity between the two. When you do understand the mass shooter, when you do understand the child molester, when you do understand the Nazi, that's when you aren't afraid of them anymore. And then you can start to actually feel pity for them. It's no longer a fear and a disgust and a hatred and dear God, get this away from me. All it is this. You start to realize what it actually is, because you open yourself up to that. And that's what Jesus did too. He said, you turn the other cheek and you bless your enemies and all that, because they don't know what they're doing. So when you understand your enemy like that, then you don't feel hatred. You just feel pity. You just feel sad. It's like, I wish that you could just see the real value and worth of existence, instead of it being, look at this dumbass. Look at this piece of shit. Oh, I'll never do that. I would never be like that. Oh, look at how fucking evil he is. What a piece of shit. And that's all he is. And they should just round up those people and just kill them off. And, why aren't there laws to get rid of these people? Or why aren't there laws to make sure this doesn't ever happen again? Instead of trying to understand why it ever did happen. Instead of trying to understand the person who actually committed the crime, they divorce that. They disassociate the person from the crime. And then they try to reduce the person into the crime. And they say all that person is this act. Because the act itself is so horrifying to that person that they can't deal with it. It's bigger than they are, so they have to dismiss it and throw it away and get rid of it, get it away from me, because they can't understand it, because they're too scared of it. And as soon as they stop being afraid of it, then they can understand it. But until then, they can't. They can't even approach it. And the horror of it is that those very same people that say, I can't understand this person, those very same people are the ones that create other people like that. They're the people that bully those people in school, who then cause them to go on a mass shooting rampage by making fun of them to begin with. They are the very thing that creates the problem that they keep claiming that they don't want anything to do with. So like I say, all these words aside, the things that we fear are the things that we end up creating. And the reason that we create them is so we can confront them, so that we can understand them, and so that we can eventually transcend them and show them how to transcend with us. That's the ultimate solution. It isn't to destroy them. It isn't to block them from ever being there. It isn't to remove them. It's to understand them so that they can learn how to transcend that same problem, to learn from that problem and get better and actually become a good person, not to just get thrown into a jail cell so that they can seethe and rage and do it again in jail to other people. Well, good, that's what they deserve. You don't know that. You don't know if that's what they deserve. How do you know you don't deserve that? Etc. So the answer to these questions is always opening up the conversation, not shutting it down. Opening up lines of questioning, not closing off lines of inquiry. And you'll see that. That's the telltale sign of somebody that is a criminal or is guilty of something, is that they will stop the conversation from going any further. Rather than opening it up for further investigation, they'll try to stop the line of questioning so that the investigation doesn't go any further, so that no further information is found. And again, we find that same closing off, which then leads to the evil and the guilt and the rage and the fear and the attack and the opposition and the pointlessness of existence and blah, blah, blah. All of that comes from the same thing. It's closing oneself off to the mystery of life, to the mystery of other people, to the mystery of the universe. And if you close yourself off to that, if you are not curious, if you try to run away from it, it will find you and it will eat you alive. And there won't be anything left of you until you finally turn around and face this thing and you realize it's just a shadow in the dark. And you walk right through it and then you're fine. And that's the irony and the weirdness of everything in existence, is that the moment that you stop being afraid of it, it goes away and it stops being, it stops being so evil or so stupid or so crazy. And it makes sense to you and you can actually work with it. And it's actually not so bad. You can actually move forward. And so the way that works, that the center point of our being and the center point of being itself is, what would you call that? Openness. Now, you could either fill that openness with nothing, which would close it, or you could fill the openness with something else. God, love, your friends, your family, your dog, your homework, whatever it is. And that's what you end up directing your life towards. But that changes over time because, like I said, it's like the capacity for something. So you can make it whatever. You can change it into whatever. But the problem that I've run across over and over and over again is, if I am this openness, then why am I not all the other types of openness? Why am I not you? If you're open and I'm open, why don't I just suddenly become you, or you become me, or that we both transcend and become some third entity like Captain Planet or something? How is it that I can still retain myself and yet ultimately I am this openness? And I think the reason is because I only ever experience relativistic openness. I never totally open, because that's what God is. But I can begin to open. I can open more or less, and I can point toward or away from certain things. And so then we again find that emotion about existence as a totality. If we zoom all the way out of existence and we see existence as one giant sphere floating around in space, and we're out in that space looking at existence, I can open myself up to that and I'll feel some kind of way, usually solid about it. Or I could close myself off to it and I could say, all it is just some hunk of energy and mass swarming around in some random configuration. And using that closed method, I'm not really then in space because I can't actually escape existence. And then I fall back into it and I become just another cog in the machine. So the only way to really escape it is to open myself up, and then I can look at it as a totality. By opening myself, I open myself up to the possibility of not being part of that existence so that I can then look at it. But what I am then is a relativistic openness, sort of like an eye. I can look at things and I can look away from things and I can zoom in and out and I can focus on it or make it blurry, but I can't ever get it to go away. There's always something in my field of vision. I don't ever see nothing unless I'm dead or I'm unconscious. But if I'm alive and I'm aware, I'm focusing on something. And what that is, I'm opening myself up to. And I'm also focusing away from other things. I'm trying to dismiss other things. I'm trying to say that those other things don't matter. They're irrelevant. They're superfluous. Don't focus on that, so that I can focus on whatever it is that I'm trying to focus on. And that choice is admittedly arbitrary, but that's what defines me as a person. It's this arbitration that I make about what I choose to focus on and what I choose not to focus on. And the reason that I'm making these decisions about what I'm focusing on and what I'm not focusing on is all of the stuff that's happened to me in my past, plus this openness or randomness or chance or chaos or mystery about what I am as a person. And so I think what I am ultimately is sort of like a function of openness. I think everything ultimately is a function of openness, and it's a drop in the ocean where God is the ocean and I am the drop, and God is absolutely open, right? God allows everything. You never see God put his hand out and say, nope, you can't do that. He doesn't ever do that. He lets everything happen. And I believe that Jesus is a reflection of that. He allows every sin to be committed against him and does not destroy those who commit them against him. He just allows that. Why? Because the rain falls equally on the just and the unjust alike. So that's the openness. Now, me being finite, me being a sinner, me being a created being, and God being uncreated, means that while we're both open, I'm less open than God is. So the lessening of that openness then makes me have my own endemic nature, right? That's different from everyone else's. Just like when I look at this phone, like what it says here, what to do if you suspect you have an infection or whatever the fuck that just said. I don't even know what the last word of that was because of the way that I was focusing on it, but you might. So even the content that we end up seeing is because of what we're looking for or what we're not looking for. And so then we end up finding things that we want to find and not finding things that we don't want to find, hopefully. And so we have, a whole suite of different things that we can add up and say, that's all examples of who I am as a person. But I can never tell you exactly who I am as a person. I can only tell you about that set of examples. Now, why is it that I chose to look at that particular sentence? And why is it that I didn't know what the last word was? And, I'm trying to tell you, whoever you are, and I don't know who you are, or even if there is anyone there, because I might just be talking to myself here, I don't know. That's in there. That has to deal with part of it. And the fact that I had been focusing on what I was saying more than focusing on what's in front of me, because I'm talking rather than listening. And why is that? Well, because I found out some information, and also because it helps me think, and I'm trying to figure out something. and I figure it out by talking about it. And so I'm talking about it. And so, why is it so important for me to know this? Well, because, that's what kind of a person that I am. I value the intrinsic information. I value information intrinsically, even if it doesn't help pragmatically. I still value it just for being information. So why is that the case? And then, I can try to delve down further and further and further, but ultimately I find this openness, this mystery, this capacity to value something. And that's what everybody has, is the capacity to value something. Only God has total capacity to infinitely value everything in existence. Only God can do that. I can't look at a cup on the coffee table and find infinite value in it, but God can. God can look at that very same coffee cup, and without any rose-colored glasses on, it isn't a lie or an illusion. God just knows that it has infinite value. He sees not just that cup, but he sees the materials that it came from, the people that worked on the mine to mine those materials, the people that worked in the factory, their families, their wives and children, and brothers and sisters, and aunts and uncles, and their community that had to come together in order to, help each other out so that they could make this cup. Now, it wasn't for the purpose of making the cup, but the cup can't exist without the community having all supported each other in order to make that cup. Because somebody had to be a farmer to feed everybody. Somebody had to be a plumber to make sure that the water that everybody's using is well treated. Somebody had to be a solar panel installation expert in order to give them the electricity that they need in order to live long enough to make the cup, etc. So somehow God is able to find that infinite value, whereas I can only ever approximate it. And the way that I approximate it is who I am as a person. And that's how I'm approaching existence. It's my relativistic openness. It's the door is cracked, but who is it cracked for? And how much is it cracked? So only God opens his door to everyone equally, all the way. The rest of us have almost an infinite number of closed doors and only a very rare few slightly cracked open doors. And that's what makes us who we are. And it isn't that they just so happen to be that way. No, we choose that. That is something that we all choose. But like I said, that choice comes from an openness. So what is a choice? A choice is a series of alternatives. If there's only one thing that I can do, that's not a choice. A choice is when I can choose between things. So there has to be a multiplicity of things to choose from in order to make a choice. Openness. So I have this openness, and then that openness is less than absolute. And that openness is centered on something that I find to be the most valuable. I'd like to say that would be the intrinsic value of information, because I'm an idealist and I like to think that about myself, but maybe it isn't. Maybe it's sex, or maybe it's something stupid like the way that farts smell. I don't know exactly what it is, but there's some central thing about me that I tend to consistently choose. But ultimately, I have the same capacity for choice that everyone else has. But presently, I've only chosen to remain as open as I am right now. But if you were to take me from my absolute beginning, when my soul very first emerged, right? And then you follow that all the way until my soul no longer exists. And then you take everybody else's soul and you compare and contrast, then you'll find more commonalities than you will differences, because the commonality is the same. It's an openness, it's a capacity, it's a depth for awareness. But what are they aware of? That's what changes. But everybody's aware. But it's what are we aware of? And why are we aware of those things? Those are choices. A lot of it has to do with our past, but not all of it. It can't be reduced to just our past, because again, that's reductive. And again, this is openness. You can't reduce openness, because to reduce openness is to close it. The more that you reduce it, the more closed it is. So it can't really be reduced. Ultimately, if I'm going to get rid of all of my past, if I'm going to get rid of all of my relations to other people, and I take myself in and of myself, the only thing that I find there is openness. And specifically, it's a relativistic openness. It's not an absolute openness. It's not absolutely open. It's open to some things, but not others. And presently, that's different than it was in the past, which is going to be different in the future also. So when I say myself, I'm really only talking about my what I have chosen to choose, what my choices have been. So my choices then define who I am. So if I really wanted to know who I was, and I wanted to have a specific answer, I would have to say that who I am is reflected in the choices that I have made, the choices I am making, and the choices that I will make.